And coming up on this week's show, have bimode trains scuppered our chances of ever fully electrifying the UK rail network? The latest Transport Select Committee suggests they just might. Secretary of State Heidi Alexander updates Parliament on HS2. Are we any closer to knowing when and how much? And ORR delivers its annual performance review of Network Rail with some rather chilling words. So, welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Straight in, from time to time, we cover proceedings at the Transport Select Committee. And last week, an important hearing took place there. It was the final hearing in the committee's inquiry into investment pipelines and avoiding boom and bust. And it featured Rail Minister Lord Hendy, DfT Director-General for Rail Services Alex Hines, and DfT Director-General for Major Projects Alan Over. It was especially important because it came after the Chancellor's spending review and after the DfT's announcement covered on last week's show setting out those rail and road enhancement schemes which had secured funding. Richard, you watched the entire thing, as usual, deserve a medal. So what did your very experienced one-time insider's eye make of it all?
Well, first of all, usual disclaimers, Nigel. It was 2.5 hours long, and it's impossible to cover every point made. And it was an unusually full agenda.
Okay.
Now, we always work hard when we do these on Green Signals not to edit them in a way that sort of disrupts the context. So, and we've tried really hard to do that here. But again, if you want the full thing, you have to watch the full thing. So we'll put the link on the website. Having said that, what I've done is I've selected a number of segments that really stood out to me, and we'll go through them before summing up at the end. So first segment, straight into it. Ruth Cadbury MP, who's chair of the committee, asked Lord Hendy that given that many witnesses to this inquiry over a period of months have characterised rail investment as boom and bust, why he thinks the industry might have taken that view.
Thank you. So we've heard throughout the inquiry that rail investment in this country is characterised by boom and bust, and you may not agree with that assessment. But why do you think the industry takes the view that we have been beset with boom and bust over recent decades?
So, I mean, if we start with the facts, actually, the control period settlements, for example, for CP7, the control period settlement for Network Rail for CP7 was 43.1 billion, which is operations, maintenance and renewal without enhancements. And actually, that's very similar to CP6, which was 47.9. Enhancements have been pretty steady at 2 billion. And actually, the recent spending review on average over the next 4 years is 2.1 billion. And that excludes the major projects, which Alan can talk about, but it excludes Northern Powerhouse Rail, it excludes HS2. And of course, HS2 is a phenomenally large project itself, and the spend is around 7 billion a year. So I think in numbers terms, you can't substantiate boom and bust. Mm-hmm.
I think the first thing, Richard, that struck me about Peter Hendy's performance at that was not so much what he said, but the way he said it. After you interviewed him at home a while ago, we said the old Hendy was back and he was chipper and up and all the rest of it. To me, this looked like a man who was delivering a script he'd been told to deliver, given the circumstances, and wasn't that happy with it. He rarely lifted his eyes to look at anybody in particular, and I actually quite felt for him. But, you know, when you take the government shilling, you have to state the government's line, don't you? You
yes,
know that. You know that.
Indeed, and that point you just made, which I think is very fair, comes even more into stark relief when we talk about electrification a little bit later on. There was a couple of bits in what he just said there, though, which I think illustrate that exactly. He said this. He said CP7, so the control period we're currently in, 43.1 billion, and he said that was very similar to CP6, the last one, which was 47.9. And I kind of went, no, it's not. That's a 10% reduction in real terms when inflation's been kind of slightly rampant. So, you know, that felt like telling us that left is right when it's not. That set the scene. right? So you thought, okay, this is going to be really interesting. Now, the next segment I'm going to play is very odd, right? And I want you to listen very carefully to the question that Ollie Glover MP, who's the Lib Dem MP for Didcot and Wantage, asks. He draws, or he attempts to draw, a comparison between the UK position of needing to balance certainty with flexibility of spending reviews and the experience in, say, Switzerland, where they've reached something of a political consensus, so they're not really bothered about who's in power, that allows them to plan and fund for the long term, almost irrespective of the political climate. And then listen to what Peter Hendy says in reply.
Much of the government's written evidence has talked about the need to balance giving certainty to industry on the one hand with allowing government flexibility, for example, through the spending review process. That approach contrasts quite markedly with those taken in some other countries. For example, Switzerland during 1987 got a political consensus around a whole series of infrastructure interventions needed to deliver a national vision for an integrated timetable, which has led to some of the highest public transport uptake rates in Europe. Which of those two approaches do you think is more useful for railway infrastructure, and does Great British Railways, is it likely to enable a bit of a change of approach to what we've got at the moment?
Well, look, the truth is we're spending public money here, and we're spending large quantities of public money. And it seems to me, I mean, I have a lot of conversations with the people I know throughout the transport industry who say, well, if it wasn't for politicians, we'd all know what we were doing. Well, you would, but you wouldn't have any money to do it. and this is hopeless if you're going to try to pretend that actually the transport industry on its own will do okay when actually you're appealing for large quantities of public money. And if you are appealing for large quantities of public money because the people in our businesses believe that they're doing the right things, then then the government of the day clearly has to have significant influence in the choice of what it does with it.
He doesn't exactly, as my dad used to put it, he doesn't exactly answer the question on the paper, does he?
Doesn't answer it at all. I mean, he does not answer it at all. The weird thing is it has nothing to do with the question, what he said. I thought he got very defensive and started sort of almost having a go with, the industry's always just saying, leave us alone and to get on with it. And you can't do that because it's public money and all the rest of it. Ollie didn't ask that. He wasn't making the point about what the government does and what the industry wants to do. He was talking about two different approaches for government. One that's affected by spending review variability, and one that's actually solves long-term agreement and collaboration amongst government. Nothing to do with the industry at all. It was a really strange answer, I thought, that one. And I don't know if you agreed with it. Really weird.
Yeah, and again, it's just another example, I guess, was the conflict in his head between what he thinks and what he had to say. I might be wrong, but...
Well, that bit we don't know, do we? But you do kind of...
I just find myself asking the question, shall
yes,
we say.
I think that's fair. But then
Look,
things
Richard, you've had to do that. You had to do that, I am sure, at the SRA when you had to stand up and adopt a position which you didn't like, you didn't believe in, but you had to go to bat for it.
I believe passionately in the doctrine of collective responsibility.
So do I.
If you are part of a team, sometimes you have to say, I've just got to do what we as a team agree is the right thing to do.
I think that's going on.
And I think that is right. And I think ministers have to do that. And if there are occasionally real matters of principle and ethics, whatever, then maybe you make a stand. But I have some sympathy with that. But that's one thing. How you deliver it is another matter, right? And we may come on to that because things then got really lively. Right?
Didn't it just?
And it's Midland Main Line electrification, the so-called pausing of it, right?
Quelle surprise.
Quelle surprise. I'm going to play 4 very quick segments, right, in one after the other, because they do paint a picture.
Oh, yes.
And then we'll chat about them. Now, first up, Alex Hines. I thought it was slightly naive in explaining, in answering Dr. Scott Arthur, as an Edinburgh MP, that in Scotland, Alex said, effectively, a rolling programme of electrification has indeed led to reduced costs and improved outcomes. This is what Alex said.
Sir Andrew Haynes said that in Scotland there's been a much more strategic approach to this. Is he right?
Yes. I mean, obviously Scotland has a national transport strategy in a way that England doesn't yet. But one of the Secretary of State's top 5 objectives is to produce an integrated national transport strategy for England, which is fantastic news. And actually, Alan and I, with DFT colleagues, were discussing it yesterday. I think the other thing is that Transport Scotland have delivered consistency of strategy. So they've been clear on having, for example, a rolling programme of electrification is good for the efficient, effective running of your railway. They have managed the railway system as a system. Transport Scotland are very, very good at making sure that ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland work together to deliver for passengers and taxpayers. And in fact, until April last year, that was literally my job. So, and when you look at what's being delivered in Scotland, and of course, it's Network Rail delivering electrification in Scotland, actually those rates benchmark very well with international comparators, because we talked about it earlier on around capability. If you have a smooth pipeline, a consistent strategy, and you do more of this stuff, you learn, and then you continuously improve. And Network Rail recently did a piece of work for me to say, well, you know, what is this magic that Scotland has that we can bring to England? And actually consistency of strategy and consistency of team were the two key things which underpin Scotland's more effective approach to rail investment, particularly electrification.
Now, that was red rag. Yeah, that was red rag to a bull for Catherine Atkinson.
Wasn't it just? Good old Catherine.
And pointed out, if that's true, then what's happened to Midland Main Line electrification is the precise opposite of doing the right thing.
Yep.
Right? Here she goes.
We were hearing before, Alex Himes, you were talking about how consistency of strategy and doing more means that you learn, and that brings the cost down. And that's what we were seeing when it came to electrification of the Midland Main Line, and the cost of electrifying that was coming down significantly per kilometre, and it was something that was being delivered on time and on budget. So don't you think that there is a concern where that is then being paused, doing all of the things that you said we don't want to be doing in terms of having that stop and start and not seeing the consistency of strategy that we would like to see?
Want to go first, or
I'll just say something briefly, which is just to say that I think that neither the Secretary of State nor I, in respect of the railway part of this investment in the spending review, would pretend that we didn't have aspirations to do more. We simply didn't have enough available to do everything that we wanted. And actually, one of the things that we have had to look at is what are the outcomes that we want about better delivery for passengers for the railway. And in truth, one of the reasons that further electrification of the Midland Main Line went down the list is because the trains that were bought as bimode trains will produce better service, more capacity, and will be better trains, and they will be able to use the wires where they exist and be able to run where they're not. And I know that that's not the perfect answer to people on the route who would like electrification north of Siston, but we haven't been able to find that there isn't the money to do everything that we wanted. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, those sections further north were lower value for money, so we've taken the difficult decision, ministers have taken the difficult decision to pause those future phases. This is one reason why you need a strategy where you align infrastructure and rolling stock, because by having bimode trains, you inadvertently weaken the business case for further electrification, because you're going to get brand new comfortable trains anyway.
So it's intriguing that we had Lord Hendy there explaining it's really the fault of whoever bought bimode trains, right? But Catherine Atkinson kept going, and she was ably supported by Ollie Glover.
Absolutely accept that further south you will have the benefits of those who live alongside the tracks being able to have the lack of the kind of the air pollution that is now going to continue to be seen for the rest of the Midland Main Line. But it also, doesn't it smack of short-term decision-making when there is general agreement that it needs to be electrified, but by pausing it, you are massively increasing the costs of carrying it out. And when it comes to having the integration between a rolling stock strategy and knowing what's actually happening when it comes to the track, the two go hand in hand. So having the stop-start, having the inconsistency, having the pause makes it just as hard for rolling stock strategy planning as anything else.
Just to add to that, we've been talking about giving supply chain confidence. I mean, it's hard to think of a better example of a project that has been yes, no, on, off, stop, start than Midland Main Line electrification. I mean, so many times we've been told, yes, it's definitely happening, supply chain have mobilised, and then, oh no, it's paused, and then, yes, it's happening, no, it's not. I mean, that's really, for me, why I agree very much with my colleague, that it's a really bad example of how things should be done.
I think what I would say is one of the key benefits of electrification is faster journey times, and no matter where you are on the route, you will benefit from that. And of course, that enables the introduction of brand new trains. And again, no matter whether you are south of Wigston or you're in Nottingham or Derby or Sheffield, you will benefit from that. But I think your broader points on strategy, I think we would recognise, which is one reason why we need this strategy. We haven't had a rolling stock strategy in this country for 30 years. We need one. It needs to be aligned with infrastructure. This will help us make more sensible decisions in the future.
This decision is absolutely in contrast to everything that kind of national strategy is seeking to achieve. We've seen the open letter from RIA, the Rail Industry Association, and the Rail Forum on Monday, and that is absolutely in line with the evidence that this committee has received from Rolling Stock and others, saying that electrification is necessary, including the unions. If the whole industry seems to be speaking with one voice to say that it is really important that we see consistency on this, then the decision taken right now to pause it seems utterly at odds with that.
There isn't enough money to do everything, and I'm sure that if the Secretary of State were here, she would say that some of the decisions that we've had to make in terms of spending choices have been quite hard decisions.
So that's quite the put down there at the end, isn't it? I mean, you can almost hear the full stop between the words, there isn't enough money.
And interestingly, I couldn't help and again, I know I'm just surmising here, but I just wonder if the words line dancing through Peter's mind were, don't you think I know that?
Well, quite possibly. He did fight back a bit. There was one little bit, the last little segment I'll play, where he did try to defend discontinuous electrification and explain there's a rationale for it. And this is what he said.
So actually, discontinuous electrification is not an arid concept. It's a real. It's going to be done on East West Rail, because the practicability on East West Rail is that you need some wires, but you don't need all the wires. So why would you equip the lot?
I wonder what Peter was thinking when Alex was exercising that argument about rolling programme electrification reduces costs. You learn stuff, you do it better.
Yeah, I think probably the words "please stop" may well have been going through his head.
STFU.
Alex is right.
He is.
Right? That's the frustrating thing. Consistency of strategy, a rolling program of electrification. If you do more of this stuff continually, you learn and improve. Consistency of strategy, consistency of team. That's the point.
You do get that, don't you, at TSCs, where somebody blurts out the truth.
Yes, no, absolutely. This bimode thing is very interesting, right? It's very interesting because the slight problem for those who are passionate about electrification is that actually Lord Hendy and Alex are correct, right? The problem is with having now got the bimode trains in evaluation terms, in appraisal terms, they are what we call a sunk cost. You cannot change that decision. That decision has been made. And unfortunately, those trains are slightly specific to that line. You may remember they're only, is it 24 metres long rather than 26 metres long? Why? Because there's a constrained platform at St Pancras, and to get 2 5-car trains in, so 10 cars, you need these shorter vehicles. So, the idea of cascading them somewhere is a little bit more complicated than it might be. And the problem is, having now bought them, and because most journeys do start and end in London, the journey time savings for the electrification to South Wigston have largely been captured, it is going to be difficult to make the case, and they're right about that. But that doesn't make it necessarily the right thing to have done, but they were right about that.
And some other arguments, some other points have surfaced as well that you didn't hear too much of in the past. We all know about electric trains and benefits and the classic argument, but I haven't heard too much the argument that, so north of Wigston now, anybody living or working near the line has got the emissions to put up with, and the exhaust, the diesel consequences and all that. And of course, Sheffield, I saw recently, I don't know whether this is right, I haven't checked it, was described as the UK's biggest city without an electric railway.
I didn't know that. It's interesting, isn't it?
I heard it. I need to check it. But I thought, you can understand why Yorkshire folk are royally hacked off about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I had wondered if it was Bristol, but I suppose you could argue Bristol Parkway is electrified. It's a really interesting point, this, because if you believe in sub-regions, and these are big sub-regions like the East Midlands, Leicester, Derby, Nottingham, and then up to Sheffield, journeys within that region that use the Midland Main Line will not benefit from electric trains because they'll be in diesel mode, So it's a very kind of London-centric sort of appraisal argument, which I think has cost the East Midlands quite dear.
And we're going to get that bimode argument writ large across the industry as a whole, aren't we? Because you and I have always taken the view that discontinuous electrification might have a role anywhere other than there is a possibility for freight, because you need OLE for that. But now, of course, GB's getting its Class 99, so that bimode argument's going to apply to that as well. They're going to say, we're not. Yeah. They can use one of them, and we don't need to wire it all.
And so all we've actually done at a macro level is transferred the risk of complexity from infrastructure to rolling stock, right? And therefore to the operator. And when you make rolling stock more complicated, you run the risk of things going wrong. So it's not a great line. But you know what? The best bit, if Peter Hendy thought that he was done with electrification, having had all that to deal with, he was wrong. Ollie Glover had another go. Here he was.
It's not as if we have a huge swathe of electrification. I mean, Russia, Hungary, Greece have a higher percentage of electrification than we do. So it's quite extraordinary that we find this so difficult. And of course, this is, I think, the mistake that's been made. We keep talking about electrification only in terms of decarbonisation. That is that's one of many benefits. Acceleration, higher reliability, proven technology, avoiding transition. Why do we find it so difficult to do it here, or have this aversion to it, including on new lines, where installing it on new lines like East West Rail is very trivial in cost compared to existing?
So what the clearest answer I can give you is that the government is absolutely determined to see economic growth, creating jobs and homes, and actually a lot of what you see set out in the Transport Secretary's statement last week is the best programme we thought we could do within the available money to do what's necessary to create the wider economic benefit of what the railway delivers.
So there you have it. That's right back to your first point, right? That kind of sums the whole thing up. There is no more money.
And the weariness was palpable, wasn't it?
It was palpable
because it was a totally political answer, wasn't it?
It did feel. And look, it's really hard, right? It's really difficult when you are having to deal with answers to a spending review which was not the one you wanted. And in fact, here's our last segment for the Transport Select Committee, where Elsie Blundell asked, actually, I thought, a really great question about the spending review in the context of the rail enhancements pipeline. And in summary, she basically said, is everything announced last week stuff we already knew about, or was there anything new? And this is what Lord Hendy said.
So the Secretary of State has obviously just announced funding for a series of rail projects. Were they all previously set out in the rail network enhancements pipeline but not funded? Are any of them new?
Well, I mean, there've been a whole pile of schemes rolling around on the deck for years without any funding, so it can't be a surprise that much of what you see is the government's thoughtful choice about which ones it wants to take forward for benefits of growth, jobs and homes. But there is some new investment in there. For example, this government's made a positive decision to make some investment in the Welsh Railway after years of historic underinvestment. So you can see various elements of that in the Burns stations on South Wales Main Line, on the increase in frequency on the North Wales Main Line, on Wrexham to Bidston, which is curiously described as Padeswood sidings, which must be by some measure the most obscure definition of any scheme in recent railway history, which is actually a capacity scheme to enable doubling the frequency of Wrexham to Bidston and other things. So there is some new stuff in there, but of course actually the consequence of ARNET not having been published for a long time is that everybody knows about lots of schemes. The government has now decided which ones it wants to fund.
And that constitutes, the recent announcement constitutes an update to the enhancements pipeline?
Oh yeah, I mean, in effect, it is the enhancement portfolio for the next 4 years.
Okay.
Basically, I love that line. Everything in the spending review are the ones that are funded and our thoughtful choices.
The government's thoughtful choice as to what delivers most for growth, jobs and houses. It was like special advisors bingo that they'd put in front of him, and you could almost imagine chief whips under the back of his neck read that. You know.
Yeah. I mean, they say, don't they? There's nothing wrong with repetition, but I must admit the growth, jobs, and housing line was repeated quite a lot. I must be honest.
I did feel for him, I have to say. You know,
well, I do have sympathy. There is, because if there's no more money, there's no more money, right? You can pretend otherwise, and everybody beats you up and says, "Well, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that?" And he's right. Well, because this is all we've got. And they had to keep going with Transpen and Route Upgrade. They had to keep going with East West Rail.
You can't stop them. You can't pull the plug.
That would have been absolute madness. So, truth is, Transport had a pretty awful spending review.
It was dreadful. Richard, you may take a gold star and go to the top of the class. You have said consistently for months in the run-up to it that it was going to be carnage, and you were right.
Because HS2 sucks out so much of the Treasury's kind of support for rail, 25 billion or whatever the number is. And, if you're a Treasury official or you're the Chancellor going, excuse me, you've done very well. We're carrying on going with HS2. We're carrying on going with Transpen 9. We're carrying on going with East West Rail. You can have a few other bits and pieces, but we've got defence, we've got education, we've got housing, we've got social.
Which is always the case with a nationalised railway.
Right?
So they were left to put a bit of a gloss on what was left, and as the old saying goes, you can put a pig in a suit, but it's still a pig.
And that is the problem. Two things I would say. One,
I'm talking about the policy there, not the people.
Yeah, no, I got that. I think people will get that.
Phew, let me just hasten.
I hope they do. Right, Ofcom sort of on the line. You're absolutely right. Right. So two other things that I think are worth mentioning, Nigel. Number one, and I feel a bit for Alan Over, who didn't make much of an appearance in those, but he was there and he did answer lots of questions. So in fairness to him, so he just didn't get picked, I'm afraid, in those segments. But he did talk about carrying on with schemes that some of which are at the moment not unfunded, but you've got to be ready for the time when they become funded, right? And they become candidate schemes and then become, and so on and so forth. I get that. But one of the problems for the rail industry, one of the problems for government, actually, generally, we are terrible at stopping spending money.
Yeah, once the tap's on.
It's really hard. So I would almost say, there's a lot of studies going on all over the place about things that are not going to happen now in the foreseeable future and probably never. He made the point in the select committee about Network North and actually said most of it was unfunded and most of it didn't have a business case. Right. Well, if that's the case, stop. That is millions of pounds when you add it all up. Right?
Until there's such a time when the nice to have things can be thought about again. Incidentally, I mean, talking about these unfunded, I mean, Peter made that comment right at the start of that question, didn't he, about lots of unfunded schemes rolling around on deck and have been there for quite a while. I remember him telling me when he was at TfL, he said to me many times that he had a variety of schemes up his sleeve, which were shovel-ready and costed. And for such times as when Boris was, quote, wobbling home on his bike and rang him up late at night and said, let's put another cable car up over the Thames, Peter said I could say, well, no, let's not do that. Let's do this. It's all ready to go. Yeah. So there's some benefit in that. He was
There
right.
is,
I was right by
but
that.
those schemes cost money to get to that point.
You don't
And if
need
there
many, though, do you? Some would be, and they can be modest as well.
There was another interesting point he made about private finance. Now, we didn't include that in the segments we just reviewed, but he was asked about private finance and contributions. And he did make the point, I thought fairly, that when you look at things like HS2, the developers have had a bit of a bonanza at places like Curzon Street, but not actually contributed anything towards HS2 at Curzon Street in Birmingham. And he made the point that when he was at TfL, he used to say to people, look, if you want to get a scheme up the list, go and have a think, say this to developers, go and have a think, because if you come and you're prepared to make a contribution, that will get it up the list, right?
Good point.
The problem is that works really well in London with very high property values. It does not work so well outside of London. And so if we're reliant on property issues being the potential funder for schemes, that could end up having a London-centric focus, and that is a challenge we all just need to be aware of.
But he made the point of Birmingham; it could have worked there with a massive development going on
Could have
there
done.
around
Yeah,
HS2,
no, I'm not knocking that point.
Nobody even went to try and get it. Anyway,
there we go.
Shall we move on?
I think we should.
One person who was particularly cross, to put it mildly, when news broke of the pausing of the Midland Main Line electrification is Sir Peter Soulsby, someone who has become synonymous with the city of Leicester. Sir Peter was leader of the council in the 80s and 90s, MP for Leicester South between 2005 and 11, and was then elected Mayor of Leicester in 2011, and he's been re-elected to the post 3 times since. Now, I know Peter a bit from my days as a director of the Great Central. He was always a real joy to deal with and totally up for Leicester, as you say. So, you caught up with Sir Peter to hear his thoughts.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome Peter Soulsby, the Mayor of Leicester, somebody who's been involved with Leicester for a very long time, to Green Signals. Peter, welcome. You know the Midland Main Line and this project probably better than almost anybody else. And you must have thought it's been stop-start. Is it happening? Is it not happening? You must have thought when this government got elected, good, now it's going to happen. And here we are, a year on, the spending review, and once again, it's been paused. What was your reaction to that?
Pretty angry, actually. But, as you say, I mean, I think all thought now that the momentum of electrification of the full line was making it an inevitability that it would be completed. We've lived with the promises of full electrification right back from, would you believe, 1981, when they began the electrification through to Bedford. That happened quickly. And then we've had stop-start ever since. And we thought that this time, at last, it was going to be completed all the way up through Nottingham, Derby, and up all the way to Sheffield. And now we're told it's not happening. They apparently don't have the money for it. Well, that's just crazy. It really is, because delaying it, well, in effect, not just putting a pause on it, actually putting a stop to it, because I can't see that if the momentum is stopped, that it will be started soon or easily. And pausing it just doesn't make any economic sense. Never mind any sense for the traveller and for the East Midlands.
One of the things that Peter Hendy, Lord Hendy, the Rail Minister, said in the Transport Select Committee very recently was he said, I know we haven't got the money, so we can't do it. We've had to prioritise elsewhere, but we've got wires all the way from London to South Wigston. So all the journeys on the Midland Main Line will benefit to an extent from that. They'll be sped up. And you've got brand new trains, and those trains will be going to London and Leicester and Derby and Nottingham and Sheffield. So you've got most of the benefits anyway. Has he got a point?
No, of course he hasn't. I mean, of course it's going to be nice to have the electrics up as far as just immediately south of Leicester to Wigston. But of course, we don't just from Leicester travel southwards. We also travel northwards, and of course the major cities of Derby, Nottingham, Sheffield don't get the benefits. What they get is effectively a diesel service from Leicester onwards. It's a major blunder. not to continue, because of course once you lose the momentum of it and lose the teams who are delivering it, restarting it becomes that much more difficult and that much more expensive, and be much cheaper to do it now than to try to return to it in who knows how many years in the future, but certainly not immediately. And we'll live with the diesels and the diesel fumes and the loss of the economic benefit to these Midlands of full electrification for who knows, years, decades to come.
And that's a really important point, isn't that? Loss of momentum. I suppose one of the benefits of pausing something as opposed to cancelling it is you can unpause it, but you don't have very long to do that. I think you might have indicated your view on this already, but do you think there's any realistic chance of unpausing it? And if so, how? And are you involved in sort of lobbying to get it unpaused?
Yes, I mean, from across the East Midlands and indeed South Yorkshire, we'll obviously continue to lobby for the unpausing of it. But the government, I think, has made it very clear that that's not something that they anticipate will happen in the near future, and that team and that investment will go elsewhere. And of course, we in the East Midlands, and I think to some extent, obviously in Sheffield and the South Yorkshire area, are amongst the are the areas with the lowest level of rail investment anywhere in the UK. We're already losing out, and to lose out again on this, and indeed to lose out on the Midland rail hub as well, because the eastern element of that is not happening, and we're not getting any progress on the relinking of the cities of the East Midlands across to Coventry. The proposals that are comparatively inexpensive, actually, but the proposals to relink, past Nuneaton to enable Leicester and Nottingham to be linked to Coventry is also nowhere as an immediate prospect, and it's also another major missed opportunity.
And there's also the Ivanhoe line, which I know was something that was considered a priority for a while, linking Leicester and Colville and Burton. And it looks as if that one's drifted into the distance as well, doesn't it? So it does feel a bit like Leicester, the East Midlands, had a bit of a kick in the teeth, really.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels. And, as I say, in some senses, I mean, Leicester still does have some benefit of the electrification insofar as it has got, but we don't get either those links across to the West Midlands, to Coventry and to the Birmingham hub, and we certainly don't get the links to the north, which are also very important to us. So yes, we do feel that we're being neglected, particularly, of course, because the Midland Main Line is the one main line that is not electrified, and we look with envy at those areas that were prioritised in the late 20th century that did get that electrification. Of course, particularly when we felt that Great Western was jumping the queue, and that actually the case for the electrification of the Midland Main Line actually rated higher than their electrification did. We lost out then, and we've lost out again today.
Well, I can think of nobody more likely to continue to fight for Leicester and for the East Midlands than you, Peter. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with us. We wish you all the best, and let's hope that pause doesn't end up being a cancellation, but is reviewed in due course. But for now, Peter, thank you, Peter Soulsby, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Richard. All the very best.
So there you go. That's the view from somebody who is absolutely in tune with his local and regional electorate. And there are some challenges ahead. I hear there's still some people saying, a bit optimistic we can change the government's mind. When you listen to Peter Hendy for the spending review for 4 years, the enhancement pipeline, that's it. So those two things don't quite tally up, do they?
Indeed. And Peter will have been completely incandescent at the wire stopped at Wigston, just short of Leicester stage. I mean, I've said it before. Anyway, HS2's in the news again, and as usual, not for a good reason. On July 17th, the Secretary of State Heidi Alexander MP submitted the government's second update to Parliament on the progress of HS2. Anyway, once you get past the political rhetoric at the beginning, there are a few nuggets, aren't there, Richard?
There's a few. I mean, lots of people have focused on some of that rhetoric at the beginning, but there's a couple of things. We learned, for instance, that the government's view that research indicates the railway will deliver economic uplift of around 10 billion in the West Midlands and 10 billion around Old Oak Common alone. So that's 20 in total. It's, and you know, as a previous discussion, but arguably none of that actually captured in terms of project contribution. The report to Parliament says 25,500 new homes will be built around Old Oak Common alone, a vital part of the government's housing mission, it says. So that, you know, that's a really interesting observation around the benefits. I don't think any of that, by the way, was factored into the original business case, certainly not the level 2 dynamic, you know, the dynamic benefits, but that's a slightly separate point. Interesting point, we did learn that the government, the DfT, have now uplifted the price base of the monies already spent from 2019 to 2025 prices. And that's why the report says 40.5 billion has been spent so far in nominal prices, i.e. the prices today, right? Much of the uplift from the previous report is therefore inflation, right? And now they haven't done that for the future cost estimate. That's to come, right? Euston, the report says, is crucial to unlocking all the potential of the railway. Yeah, good. We agree with that. We still know, of course, that private finance scheme is going to be required, but at least there's that commitment still there. And finally, I think the thing that people did comment on, safeguarding for Phase 2B Eastern leg has been lifted. For clarity, though, that is the bit up to Leeds. That is not Phase 2B Western leg, which is the bit that would take you up to Manchester and the connection with Northern Powerhouse Rail. We're still some way off understanding what Mark Wilde's Project Reset will mean for the timetable and estimated cost. Heidi Alexander says in the report it's going to be 2026 before we know that. And at that point, costs will be rebased to 2025. So some interesting stuff. But there's still some big issues to be understood and resolved.
You would have thought that government would have been on the case now. One of the things that really sort of shocked me was I remember Jim Steer telling me that the agglomeration, wonderful word, benefits around King's Cross St Pancras after HS1 came was something like 20 times the original guesstimates that it might be. You would have thought a government which was aware of that might have been ready in Birmingham for that sort of big development and round Old Oak, wouldn't you? But seemingly not.
Yeah, I don't think you can blame this government for that. I mean, I think that's a wider government issue.
Government generally, I meant.
Yeah. They are looking at the Greenbrook appraisal criteria. That sounds a very nerdy thing, but that could help in terms of what's called place-based evaluation, because, you know, there's no question that Andy Burnham knows exactly what the benefit to Manchester of putting HS2 is there, right? Might not be the same from some civil servant sat in Whitehall, but Andy knows.
Of course he does.
So if we can move to a place-based evaluation methodology, that could help. All right. But that is something for the future.
An interesting report that was published in the same week as the HS2 report we just discussed is the ORR's annual review of Network Rail's performance. Now, performance monitoring is a key aspect of the ORR's current duties, and it will be key to see what happens to that role in the draft rail reform bill, if anything, of course. Anyway, it's an interesting document, and there's lots of rich data here, which is worth dipping into. So, Richard, you're a great data dipper. What points did you spot?
Well, it's a long report. They've actually made it easier to read than normal. It's almost like got an exec summary document and then loads and loads of detail, which is actually very helpful. I just spotted a couple of things which I think are worth a mention. Funding gets a mention. The report says, that's the ORR, as we noted in our final determination for CP7, funding is constrained, reflecting wider fiscal conditions, which is a fancy way of saying there ain't enough money. In planning for this control period, Network Rail has had to make choices about how expenditure should be prioritised to deliver best value for the railway now and in the future. So, okay, what does that mean? Well, the report goes on to say this, and this I am going to read because it is actually very relevant. You say, Compared to Network Rail's initial delivery plan, it is now planning fewer renewals in year 2 and across CP7. Reduced renewals delivery plans risks additional deterioration of railway assets, which may lead to more asset failures and therefore disruption to train services in the long term. It may also impact efficiency and lead to higher costs in future control periods. We've informed government funders of our concerns in our letter setting out our review of Network Rail's latest forecast. And if that's not worrying enough, there was this line that was also in the report. Network Rail set aside 1.7 billion of risk funding in cash prices for input price risk, i.e., inflation on input costs, and unplanned costs within its delivery plan for CP7. So 1.7 billion. During the first year, a significant proportion of this fund was drawn down and allocated due to costs related to input prices, the financial performance incentive regime, and so on and so forth. And in fact, Network Rail goes into year 2 with 760 million remaining in the risk fund, right? So they had 1.7 and they're basically nearly $1 billion of it's gone in year 1. So what does all that mean in English? What it means is...
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, no. What it means is that, 1, instead of doing renewals, we're spending a lot less on that, and we're basically going to get we're going to sweat the assets we've got to give them a longer life by maintaining them more, right? That is something you cannot do forever. And the ORR are saying, but there's a risk of that from a performance and potentially even a safety issue, which they're not saying these are unsafe, but they're saying that you can't keep doing that forever. And then the second thing
it breaks eventually, doesn't it?
It breaks, right? We all know that with cars or anything.
With
right?
your car, yeah.
In the end, you can't keep maintaining and expect the same performance as it ages. And they're saying that the buffer that allows them to deal with shocks, over half of it has been spent in the first year of a 5-year control period. So those are 2 really big concerns. Peter Hendy didn't talk about this in the select committee. He said, yeah, I accept that renewals are down, but one of the reasons is because climate change expenditure has gone up massively and arguably should have gone up more, which is great and true, but that's why you can't really say CP7 funding is basically the same as CP6. It absolutely is not.
Yeah, very, very good point, Richard. Very good point. But we are where we are, aren't we? And none of it fills me with joy or indeed a lot of encouragement for the times ahead for the railway men and women. They're going to have to work really hard, as I know they will, to keep it going.
The can has been kicked down the road. The problem is the road ain't very long.
Just one example. I remember in the early days of rail track, the rails had been replaced in the Severn Tunnel every 5 years because of the very hostile environment in there. Railtrack decided to increase that to 7, and they immediately started snapping after 5 years and having real problems. These sort of periods are arrived at as a result of experience, aren't they?
Yep.
And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us, because we love you all. First of all, thanks to RIA, the Railway Industry Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. And then a big thank you, as ever, to all those wonderful people who left us super thanks on YouTube this week. And you all are: Bob Walsh, Andrew Seddon, Nigel Mapston, Howard Jones, Graham Whitley, Alan Kirkman, Alistair Rutledge, D412 Video, Chris Exley, Pete Driver, Techno Andrew, Brian Calladine, Caroline Cleveley, Ashley Hughes, Graham Webster, Rufus Short, and our old friend John Kirkman. Thanks ever so much for these super thanks. I know we say it every week, but I promise you it's not just words. They make a real big difference to us in moving this show towards sustainability, and we are so grateful for your support.
We are indeed. And thanks also to Rob Batchelor, who upgraded his membership from bronze to silver. And don't forget, if you are a member and you're a silver or a gold member, do please let us have your address if you've not already done so. Email info@greensignals.org, because we need to be able to send you stuff, and we can't do that without an address. But thank you for your support.
Indeed, thanks very much. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. I feel like I need a fanfare, but I won't give one. The operation of C2C services transferred to DFT Operator Limited, DFTO, on July 20th, making C2C the next operator to be nationalised under the government's public ownership plans for the operating railway. C2C runs services from Fenchurch Street, lovely little terminus, to Shoebury-Ness, and is the sixth operator to be in DFTO's hands, joining Northern, TPE, South Eastern, LNER and South Western Railway, meaning DFTO is now responsible for 28% of all UK passenger rail journeys. C2C has been consistently rated as one of the best performing operators in the country. How times change, Richard. Pre-privatisation, this route was so bad it was routinely known as the misery line, was it not?
It was, and now I think it's doing 97% time to 3, which is fantastic.
Well done.
Great little management team, proving, and I hope they're allowed to carry on doing what they've been doing so well.
And Fenchurch Street is well worth a visit, and it's a very cosy little terminus, actually.
It's a remarkable little terminus, yeah, and sort of nestling in all those buildings. It's quite the thing. Here's one we don't hear often, Nigel, a new station that is expected to open early, thanks to John Kirkman for sending us a note of this one. Beaulieu Park Station, which you might think is in the New Forest, but it's not. It's actually to the north of Chelmsford. It was planned to open at the end of this year at a cost of, wait for this, £175 million.
No!
But it's looking like the station could open this autumn now. First new station on the Great Eastern Main Line in 100 years. It's 3 platforms, 700 parking spaces. I mean, you've seen the images. It is a serious station, right? This is not Haxby, right? Let's put it that way. Work started in March 23 on the station, which is part of a wider regeneration of the Beaulieu Park estate, where new road infrastructure, 14,000 new homes are being built. So, it's a big thing. And that sort of investment is good to see.
And good news stations are always good to see, aren't they?
Indeed.
Now, the Rail Delivery Group has launched what it says is the largest passenger satisfaction survey in the history of Britain's railway. Sounds a bit Trumpian, doesn't it? The aptly named Rail Customer Experience Survey will invite approximately 10,000 passengers a month for their views on the railway while travelling to their destination. The aim is to speak to an estimated 130,000 passengers every year. First set of results is due to become publicly available on an interactive online dashboard this autumn. Results will be used to help operators to improve the service for passengers and inform industry decision-making, apparently. It's all been put together by RDG, DFT, Network Rail, Transport Focus, and the Customer and Revenue Growth Team, previously part of the GBR Transition Team, if you were wondering.
I'm sure it'll be a very big and beautiful thing. Now, thanks to Steve Roberts for this one. What has been described as a landmark partnership has been agreed between the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and Germany's Chancellor Merz to quote, pave the way for direct international rail services that could boost tourism to the UK and support jobs as outlined in the plan for change and strengthen cross-border trade within the next decade. They're not very good at snappy comment anyway.
No.
A joint task force will bring together transport experts on both sides to address the barriers to establishing direct long-distance services, including things like border and security controls. And obviously the media was carrying the story of a potential direct service from London to Berlin or from Berlin to London, depending on your point of view. Personally,
I was going to say, you're not impressed, are you?
Well, it's not that I'm not impressed. I just don't see it. I can understand potential market to Frankfurt. But once you start going to places like Berlin, I mean, the distances are so huge, I think it becomes a lot more challenging. The border issues and the constraints at the stations in those places are very significant. I mean, a number of people suggested Cologne, but, Cologne Hauptbahnhof is a very challenging place. I can see Frankfurt. I struggle a bit beyond that. But anyway, it's still a few years off whatever else happens.
Here's a nice light-hearted one, Richard, that was sent to us by Brian Tennant. A former Royal Marine was photographed taking his lamb on a ScotRail train with him. Yep, live sheep. According to ScotRail, there's nothing to say that sheep are not allowed on trains, and it was okay because the passenger, Jai Gibson, was complying with the rules by having said lamb on a lead. I'm sorry. The lamb is apparently called NJ and was orphaned, so Mr. Gibson is caring for it. The latest of around 200 orphaned lambs he has looked after over the years. Plenty of passengers shared photographs of the pair on social media, and ScotRail even shared the CCTV footage on their social media. Whatever next day, Richard. It's a strange thing maybe for an ex-Marine. You don't expect that, but hey.
Fantastic. That was a great story, that. Well, I'm afraid we're going to need to set aside our feelings about folk music for this one, Nigel.
Okay.
BBC Radio 2 will be running a 21st century folk programme from July 28 to August 3rd on some of its shows to celebrate Railway 200. That's good. Right? 5 folk acts have written and composed songs about people whose lives have been influenced by trains. I have to say, some of the stories are really special. There's Siggy from Hampstead, who is part of the Windrush generation. At 85, he's still doing shifts in customer services at Elstree and Borehamwood Station. And there's Charlotte and David from Bradford, who have a pretty touching story, actually. They met when Charlotte was sadly beside the track, intending to take her own life. When David, a train driver, got out of his cab, spoke to her until she felt able to board the train. She contacted him to say thank you. They started dating, and now they're married with children. What a lovely, lovely story. So there's some great stories that apparently will all be told through the folk songs being written by popular artists. You'll be able to listen to them on BBC Sounds at bbc.co.uk/folk.
That has got to be surely one of the most unusual stories when people say, well, how did you two meet then?
It is, but what a lovely,
fantastic,
and, joyous ending.
Yeah. Incidentally, Siggy, I seem to recall, was an NRA winner some years ago, I think. And that's the end of this week's Railway News Roundup. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, do drop us an email at news@greensignals.org. Big news, small news, your area, more widely. Don't assume we know, let us know. And if we use your snippet, we will attach your name to it and give due credit.
Indeed so. So now it's time to do the quiz. Now, last week's question was this. It was a reader question. It was from Jay Carroll, who said, where in the UK can you see polar bears and a Class 720-720 at the same time?
Fox me.
Yeah. And the answer is Jimmy's Farm and Wildlife Park, which is adjacent to the Great Eastern Main Line at Worsted near Ipswich, which apparently has, I think there's 4 polar bears there. Who knew? Well, it turns out quite a few people knew, actually. And the winner randomly chosen from the many, many correct answers we had was Steve McComb. So well done, Steve. If you could send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org with your address, we'll get your mug out to you. Now, to this week's quiz. And you'll no doubt want to say something about the Greatest Gathering in a minute, Nigel. But since the Greatest Gathering in Derby is getting very close to us, it is on August the 1st to the 3rd inclusive, and it will be possibly the largest gathering of historical contemporary railway locomotives, multiple units and coaches in the world, like ever. So now, tableau and cavalcades used to be fairly regular events, but I'd like to know, when was the first genuine railway cavalcade held and why? So if you think you know the answer to that,
good one.
quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, July the 26th, after which we'll put all the correct answers in a hat, select a winner at random to receive a mug. Greatest Gathering, Nige.
I was just going to say, I can't let that go without mentioning Greatest Gathering. We are going to be there. As we sit here and record this, it's just a fortnight away. And we are illustrating the old adage that there's nothing like a deadline or imminent disaster to concentrate the mind, because it's certainly concentrating our minds. We'll be there. We have a stand. Do we know a number for it, Richard?
No, but we will be on what's called the green, right in the middle of the site. We're going to have a little tent, and we are going to be broadcasting. We're going to do some live streams. We're going to do some chats. We're going to do some filming. We're going to do some roaming around, and we're going to do our very best to make sure the whole thing doesn't collapse into organizational chaos, which I'm quite sure we will. So we'll be there, and hopefully anybody who's there will come and say hello. And if you're not there, you will be able to enjoy the greatest gathering through the medium of green signals.
I'm really looking forward to it now. Well, I always have been, but as we're putting shape on what we're going to do, I mean, I'm looking forward to doing the old Martin Brundle grid walk thing around the yard with you on a camera and seeing who we bump into and who we can find. It'll either be lots of interesting people or it'll be a complete damp squib. Who's to say? We think it's going to be good. But do come and say hello if you're going to be there. One of the 12,500 people each day after the release of 2,500 more tickets recently. And let's make it a great success, and let's just pray to the weather gods that after all this endless sunshine, we don't get rain.
Indeed.
So we'll see you there, hopefully. And if we don't, as Richard says, you can watch us on screen. This is a great little story to end on. Lots of teenagers have just completed a week's work experience, including young Beckett Hawkins, who asked if he could spend his work experience with GB Rail Freight. Well, big shout out to GBRf. They pulled out all the stops to make Beckett's week one to remember. His dad, Ben, who Steph and I used to work with, he was the editor of Practical Photography magazine, told us Beckett had the time of his life. I don't think I've ever seen him more excited about anything ever. He got to drive the training simulator. He helped out with the Class 99 launch, during which I met Beckett. It was good to meet you, Beckett. Got to sit in an 08, a 47, 66 and a 99. Met boss John Smith and shared a cab with him while driving the 47 around the yard, and was really looked after by the GBRF team. So well done, all of you. He's already looking at the GBRF job page, so I think they may be seeing him again in the not too distant future as an applicant. What a fantastic story, and well done GB for creating such an inspiring experience for the next generation. And your fun fact for the day is that Beckett has got railways absolutely in his DNA, because his dad's dad, Beckett's grandfather, is none other than Phil Hawkins, the renowned railway artist now living down in Dawlish, who's produced fantastic canvases about all aspects of railways.
It's a great story, that. And the fact that he met you and he still wants to join the railway, I think is absolutely brilliant.
Oh,
so, yeah, great.
Go and boil your head. And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Green Signals channel on YouTube. And if you really want to support us, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon, for which you'll get all sorts of cool goodies, at the core of which are the superb videos produced largely by Richard and Steph, and which are just getting better and better. I think the Class 99 one's done, 150,000 views now, has it, Richard?
It has, yeah.
So good quality stuff being produced, and some get it members only. But most importantly, please join us again next week for this show, which will always be free. We'll see you then, and maybe shortly after that, we'll see you at the greatest gathering. Until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
See you soon.